and they're not happy. And the number of people who a month later go back and say, can I have my inhaler back, please, my normal one? We get a lot of that because we just don't have the time to sit down with them for 20 minutes and run through it like we should do. You're right. It's a nice thing to try and do, but in practice, it's often very difficult.
It's a perfect example. Go on, try us with the second one. We don't normally allow more than one, but go on, lay it on us.
Yeah, not even for media doctors.
Yeah, come on, you're a media doctor. We might let you.
I'll go with frusemide, or furosemide as it is now.
Yeah, don't
very
get
quickly
on pronunciation.
This is a drug that we used to treat heart failure, a diuretic that I used to carry in my bag and use every week to treat heart failure at home with very sick patients. And do you know what? I haven't used it for 8 years. I mean, I use it orally in very low dose. And it's just a reflection of how far we've come in dealing with people who are having heart attacks and how far more of them are surviving and coming out of hospital unmaimed in terms of heart damage. I can't believe the difference it's made. We literally don't even stock intravenous frusemide anymore, and I wouldn't have dreamt of leaving the house without it when I first started working in general practice in the 80s. So that's a good news story. Very quickly, just got to say, I had a patient come back from France who said, I need to get some repeat medicines from you, doctor. And my GP there's got me on 500 milligrams of frusemide. And in the UK, the single dose is normally 40. And I think there must be a mistake. It must be a 50 milligram tablet. But no, it was a 500 milligram tablet.
What? That's a horse tablet.
I've never heard of this before. So I thought, I worry about prescribing 80. Now, if you go to France, they use 500 in a single tablet.
That's a great story, as you said. But one of the things, I've both salbutamol and frusemide being two classic examples. So I do this sort of thing when I'm teaching. And the reason why people pick desert island drugs is they're comfortable with them because they work. So both frusemide and salbutamol, they're perfect, aren't they? Like when you give people IV frusemide who's got pulmonary edema, they think you've saved their life, within 20 minutes. Same with salbutamol. And that's why people pick these things, because they're comfortable with them. But as we all well know, just because something's good in the short term, sadly, it's not so good in the long term. And that's the difficulty that why we get into polypharmacy, I think.
Yeah, I mean, salbutamol is the classic example of that. It's a great drug for short-term relief, but an awful drug if it's used on its own.
Yeah, well, that's good. Yeah, we'll let you have two. Why not? So what about a career anthem then? I'm really looking forward to this. What do you want to give us?
Well, I thought about being a smart ass and coming up with something deep and meaningful, but I'm into music of all sorts, but I am really into rock music. I normally get to listen to it on my own because nobody else I know really likes it, particularly my wife.
What, thrash metal?
No, not that bad. So I'm a sort of Nirvana, Foo Fighters, Muse, one of my favourite bands at the moment. And I've been to see them live, watching Glastonbury. I love that sort of music. But if I had to pick an anthem, it would be from the 70s when I was doing my A-levels. And I mean, it sounds nauseating, but it's by a British band called UFO, and it's called Doctor Doctor.
That's a great one.
I know, it's a great track, and excuse the name, but I played it during my A-levels. It came out when I was doing my biology, chemistry and physics and struggling. I actually didn't do very well in my chemistry A-level and had to retake to get into medical school through clearing. So I remember that track. I perhaps spent too much time listening to it. I don't actually own it. I don't have a copy. I don't even have it on my, iPod list or whatever you call it these days. But I hear it on the radio every so often. And I heard it a couple of weeks ago, coming back from a particularly hard Friday, about 7 o'clock at night. I was knackered. It came on, and it's still one of those records where I turn it up full volume and it takes me right back to those halcyon days of the 70s. So that would be my anthem. No one else will want to listen to it. I'd just sit in a room on my own with it turned up loud, probably playing my tennis racket.
The rules of the game are that if you select it, it goes into the Oral Apothecary playlist. And so we've got all sorts in there. So you can definitely have UFO by Doctor Doctor is the name of the track. And it's very similar to, I don't know if you've heard, but Jamie and I give our anthem around similar. We lived in the same house. So our anthems were the ones that we had on when we went in the shower before every single finals exam. And that's what, we've used it for the rest of our career as a kind of oomph us forward. So it sounds similar.
I've never showered with him. Can I just put that on the record?
Wasn't yours Richard Clayderman, Jamie?
No, as I said, I revised to Richard Clayderman. Yeah.
Harry Manilow, I heard.
Go on, tell the listeners, Jamie, what was yours?
Sweet Child of Mine. Mine is my go song.
Mark will appreciate that. Mine was Dignity, Deacon Blue. I get a lot of hassle for that on Twitter. I don't know why. Anyway, and the third thing, and I would say our listeners really enjoy this more than anything. We get lots of Twitter, social media interaction about this. And that's a book recommendation for the Oral Apothecary Library.
Okay, so I'm going to go back in time again to the 70s, to when I was about 10 years old, to It Shouldn't Happen to a Vet by James Herriot. This is before All Creatures Great and Small. In fact, he didn't write a book called All Creatures Great and Small. That was a sort of collection of his early works. My mother came home and I was a bookworm then, and she gave me this book. I just come out of Swallows and Amazons, I expect, or something like that. And I read this. And I thought, I want to be a vet or I want to be a doctor, because it was about this. It's about people. And although I'm very interested in science, I'm interested in science, how science is applied at the coal. And actually what I like is people. And I like talking to people and interacting with them. And that's one of the reasons I'm not a vet. I realised that I started off, I used to work with a vet when I was a teenager and help out and everything. Big animal practice in Herefordshire. And I realised that actually it wasn't the animal. I mean, I like animals, but I wasn't as keen on the animals as I was on the farmers and the farmers' wives. I know it sounds terrible.
Surely you get cake though, don't you?
Oh, yeah. But that would be my book. It really shaped my future. Of course, it's everywhere now and it's different. Everyone knows about All Creatures Great and Small. But back in the day, opened a window onto a different life for me.
That was a book. So when I was a kid, I used to go to my nan's for 2 weeks and she had the compendium there. So I was bored and I would have been about 10, 11. And I can still remember sitting there reading it, thinking it was brilliant. Because he's also in the RAF, isn't he? Or the our Royal Flying Corps, and there's stories in there about him joining the Royal Flying Corps, but it was all stories about him travelling across the moors and talking to farmers at 3 o'clock in the morning. And you learned that, you know, if their cow died, their whole business would go under, sort of thing. It wasn't just about the fact he was a vet, it was about the fact that he was part of that community. I love those books. Sorry, I'm going on, but you've evoked a memory in me from those books.
There you go. Well, Mark sounds he's very much landed in the 1970s.
Yeah, Beyond Borg started the day.
Yeah, I mean, wow, we're in 2021, Mark. You know that, don't you? Thank you for being so honest, and 3 great picks, actually. Particularly love the drug ones, obviously, but that's great. They will definitely go forward, so it shouldn't happen to a vet. James Herriot will go into the Oral Apothecary Library.
It's an insight into how clinical pharmacists and pharmacy technicians have only just landed in the practice, I think, isn't it?
In the Cotswolds.
We get there eventually.
It's the quality, isn't it? Yeah. Okay, our micro discussion next. Look, I spent the last 20 years educating healthcare professionals, healthcare managers, civil servants and politicians about evidence-based medicine, and in particular an interest in how we describe risk and benefit of medicines. From that experience, we know that lots of healthcare professionals struggle with the concepts. It's one of those perishable skills where you can get up to speed with it, but if you don't use it, you can lose it. So Mark, in 2015, I think you were the recipient of the 23rd Health Watch Award for improving public understanding of evidence-based medicine. So over your career, can you tell us how you think we've improved our interactions in this area with patients around describing risk and benefit? And in previous episodes, we've obviously talked about shared decision-making quite a bit.
I'm a bit depressed about this subject, to be honest, because I'm not sure we've improved as much as we should have. I think we were making major strides. But what's happened recently is that we're a bit dismissive of the risks, and I think we overplay the benefits, and I think statins are a classic example of that. When you work in a health service that's short of time, they follow the guidelines, or the tram lines as I often call them, and get given, you know, 1 dose of this, 1 dose of that, 1 dose of something else, and 1 dose of this, and it's not explained to them what the downsides might be. And I think in many cases the benefits are oversold. So what I do whenever I talk to a patient, I use the BRAM technique. So what are the benefits, what are the risks, what are the alternatives, what else can we do? For instance, if you're at primary prevention using statins, you're at risk of heart disease, you can lose some weight, do some exercise, stop smoking, all of which are far, far more beneficial than me prescribing a tablet. And then what if we do nothing? What will happen to you if you do nothing? You know, you won't blow up. This calculator I'm using to work out your chances of having a stroke or a heart attack aren't your chances. It's what will happen to, 1,000 people like you. Some of them will be poorly, some of them won't. Some of them will get a benefit from the drug, some of them won't. I can't tell where you sit on that spectrum. And the reason why I'm depressed is often the patient ends that explanation, turns around to me and says, well, what would you do, doctor? Would you take it? That's not a bad question. You know, they still defer to you to make the decision for them. Or they say, the specialist said I had to have this 80 milligrams of atorvastatin because if I don't have it, I'll have another heart attack. And that's imprinted on their mind. So it's very difficult to have a rational decision about, you know, what it's doing for them and what it might not be doing.
So your postgrad training of understanding risk and benefit yourselves, when I spend time in front of healthcare professionals, they struggle with the concepts, you know, and, you know, I think Information Mastery Voice from the States, who are coming on in subsequent episodes, introduced this photonumerophobia, the fear that one's fear of numbers will come to light. And when we're running sessions and we say, right, we're going to do a bit of, you know, absolute risk or relative risk and numbers needed to treat now, a lot of people just either zone out, you know, because it's something that has been taught badly over the years. But the point is that you need to be able to understand these concepts to have these discussions with patients.
Yeah, I mean, numbers needed to treat is something that I use quite a lot. Patients, it's not a very patient-friendly concept. Doctors don't grasp it. If nurses don't grasp it, physios don't grasp it, then, you know, it's very unfair to expect most patients to say, oh, I get that now, that, you know, so you have to treat 100 people for 5 years or whatever to get the result you're after. I mean, I was talking to somebody about prostate cancer recently, and we were saying that, you know, with most prostate cancers of the middle grade, low-grade type that we don't really know what to do with. If we do radical treatments like surgery and radiotherapy, we probably have to treat 40 men for one of them to benefit significantly with their life. But that's great if you're that one bloke, but not so good if the other 39. But still, the patients don't really get that. And I think it's a struggle. Plus, and this is something that people forget, you do have to sell what you're doing in medicine. It makes a difference. And I don't mean sell in a bad way. I mean, you have to be enthusiastic about the intervention that you're offering to a patient if you think it's going to make a difference. And we see this with hip surgeons, for instance. We get letters back now from the hip surgeon saying, I saw Mrs. Blogg, she's got an awful hip, she's in agony, she's on maximum therapy, which is causing her all sorts of she needs an operation. There's a potential to transform her quality of life. But she may have a blood clot, her leg may fall off, she may die, she may not survive the anaesthetic. And it's all the risks that are presented to the patient, which are important, but it's the way that they're presented that the patient comes away thinking, this is a really, really dangerous operation, I don't want it. Or the surgeon has to say, look, you really do need this operation because I think it will transform your life, which it probably will. So it's how you end that consultation in particular makes a massive difference to the way that the patient goes away. And you can have a patient and a relative in the room with you, and they come away with two different conclusions. It's very, very odd.
Mark, going back to your original point about how much you've enjoyed, and you must enjoy it because you've done it for all these years. You were one of the very first, TV doctors, weren't you? So your position, if you like, within the population, what you say and what you now put in your articles, you must realize the gravity of, and I'm sure you're very careful in what you say, because you must realize that people do listen to you. People like you and Sarah Jarvis and Hilary Jones, they do listen to you.
Well, yes. I mean, I think I've seen myself, I've tried to be slightly different. I mean, my approach has been that I've been a conduit, or tried to be a conduit, for some very great healthcare professionals, doctors, pharmacists, physios, whoever, and put forward their studies, their data, their findings. And they're often not as good at getting the message across because it's not their job. I've tried not to be the expert on all things because you can't be. I've just tried to pass on and put some perspective on what other people have done. So I basically take the credit for all everybody else's hard work. I think that's slightly different from being somebody who alters behaviour amongst people. I like people I'm very lucky with the Times. They're an interested audience. Radio 4, very interested audience. So you can present them with quite complicated scenarios. You can talk about risk and benefit, alternatives, doing nothing and all of that sort of stuff, and they get it. And then I send them away hoping they make a better decision about their own health. I'm not deciding for them or telling them how to do it.
Yeah. I mean, an episode doesn't happen unless we mention the inverse care law on this podcast. And so you're dead right. But of course, the BBC and the Radio 4 listener are perhaps not the people who have got the greatest need for this. And so it becomes a real challenge, doesn't it? And I'm also a big fan of Tim Harford, and I wondered whether you knew him, because he's a big one, isn't he, for trying to get people to, like even his latest book about trying to get people to understand simply about numbers, and whether or not people in MPs and things should have to do some kind of training to understand numbers, because they just constantly get it wrong and they constantly get the wrong messages, and then that confuses the public, doesn't it?
Well, I'm going to mention COVID again here, and that's against the rules, but those slide presentations that they give the data are just appalling, and they are getting over the heads of the people that really, really matter. I cut my teeth journalism after I finished working for General Practitioner. My first ever job was writing for the Sunday Mirror, and it's one of the things that taught me the best skills in journalism. It's not about fancy words, fancy terms, long sentences. It's about crystal clear, simple messages, and not many of them. And that's not to patronize Sunday Mirror readers. It's just to say, actually, that's how we should be directing our medical information. You look at a good broadsheet that's well written, it's super crisp. And we need to make our messages simple and more easy to understand. But you're right, inverse care law. I mean, the Radio, Tim is a great bloke, I do know him, but his audience is very much the same as mine.
Yeah.
They're not the ones that need converting. It's the rest of the nation. We're speaking to the key minority.
And I'm talking about simple messages and being a bit depressing. So early on in my career, I was lucky enough to work with Professor Glyn Elwyn, who did the sort of option grids. And we used to use, do you remember, Jamie, the Cates charts, which were basically a grid full of smiley faces and sad faces that presented numbers needed to treat in a really simple format. And that was 20 years ago. So it is a bit depressing that we don't seem to have operationalized those sort of materials and methods into general practice, or into, well, not just general practice, into shared decision making in general. I wonder why that is.
We do have smiley faces if I think either the Q
Q
or I think Q is it.
They use hearts, don't they?
Yeah, hearts, similar sort of message.
Yeah.
But it is assuming that people at a glance get this concept of numbers needed to treat.
Yeah.
I mean, it's all about time, isn't it? If we had half an hour with every patient, you could go through all these different angles and make sure that you did it right. When you're pushed, this is the sort of stuff that goes, just take business books, you'll be fine. Bye-bye.
It's also stuff that might get worse with COVID, isn't it? If the thrust now is towards video consultations, then that's a whole new game in terms of risk communication as well, isn't it?
I mean, I'm getting a lot